Cop opens fire on Army lieutenant in broad daylight. You won't believe the outcome. Before we go further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this one. The dawn mist clung to the concrete expanse of the training yard like a secret waiting to be revealed. Pale light seeped through the high chain-link fence, casting long, wavering shadows across the asphalt. An occasional bird call, indistinct, almost hesitant, drifted from beyond the perimeter, mingling with the whisper of a gentle breeze that stirred the scattered equipment. For a moment, it felt as though the world had paused, suspended in a breath before the day's real work began. Lieutenant Samuel Hawkins emerged from the briefing room with deliberate calm, each step measured, each movement precise. His uniform was immaculate. Crisply pressed charcoal trousers, a navy blue jacket adorned with brass insignia that caught the dawn's first glimmers, and a spotless white shirt peeking from beneath. He carried himself like a man accustomed to command, straight shoulders, chin lifted, eyes straight ahead. There was an authority in his gait, an unspoken confidence that seemed to push the very mist aside as he moved. Not far from him, by the faded paint of a clustered row of targets, stood Officer Miguel Ramirez. He appeared smaller in stature but no less significant in purpose. The dull click of his safety catch being released echoed unnaturally loud against the silent yard. Ramirez's forehead was damp with perspiration despite the coolness of the hour, and his fingers trembled slightly as he checked the chamber of his service pistol, then reloaded it with meticulous care. Every clink of metal seemed to underscore his inner turmoil. Ramirez stole a glance over his shoulder toward Hawkins. Toward certainty. The lieutenant's back was rigid, shoulders squared as though braced for an unseen gale. Yet there was no wind here, only tension. The officer's eyes darted away, flicking to the footprints etched in the soft earth beyond the fence, to the distant silhouette of training vehicles lined up like silent sentinels. He closed his eyes for a split second, inhaling the cold air, desperately seeking composure. The camera would linger on this tableau, drawing viewers into the moment's fragile equilibrium. A slow push-in on Ramirez's face would reveal the taut lines at the corners of his mouth, the rapid rise and fall of his chest, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched in time with his quick breaths. Cutaways would study his hands, knuckles whitening as he adjusted his grip on the pistol, fingers brushing the worn leather holster. Each tiny movement spoke volumes. Apprehension, resolve, a fear of what might come next. Then the lens would shift to Hawkins, illuminating facets of his demeanor that branch beyond mere self-assurance. Perhaps he pauses mid-stride, fingertips grazing the pocket of his jacket as though reaching for unseen orders. A soft exhale escapes him, unnoticed by Ramirez but caught by the camera's unforgiving gaze. His eyes, fixed on the horizon of training obstacles, betray a momentary hesitation. As if he, too, senses the friction in the air. It's a reminder that even the steadiest leaders harbor doubts when the stakes are high. A distant clang disrupts the silence. A lone piece of metal scraping the ground, the sound amplified against the morning hush. Ramirez snaps his head toward the noise, pupils dilating. Hawkins turns as well, but their reactions differ. Ramirez's expression cracks into alarm, Hawkins's into crisp curiosity. This tiny symphony of motion underscores the gulf between them, one afraid of unseen dangers, the other trained to assess and neutralize them. The yard's boundaries become characters themselves. To the left, the barracks stand in somber rows, their windows darkened as if unwilling witnesses. To the right, an array of deserted training vehicles, helmets perched on hatches like lost spectators. Behind the camera, viewers might sense the crackle of distant radio static. Too faint to decipher but potent enough to suggest that somewhere activity has begun. This layering of environmental cues, sights, sounds, even scents as the morning air catches the tang of fresh dew, intensifies the mood, a collective inhale before the release. As Hawkins resumes his walk, the camera tracks alongside him, keeping Ramirez in the frame's periphery. The lieutenant's shadow slides across the ground, intersecting the officer's dark one, yet never fully merging. It's an unspoken metaphor. Two lives bound by duty but divided by perspective. Ramirez watches that shadow. He clenches his jaw, then slides a palm over the pistol grip. His finger drifts toward the trigger guard. Hesitation perched like a hawk's talon ready to strike. In this stretch of silence, narration would be minimal. Perhaps a soft voiceover musing on the nature of duty, the weight of orders, and the unseen conflicts that roil beneath military decorum. We might hear, They say discipline is born of silence. But when two voices clash within that silence, it can become a storm. The words underscore the tension without spelling out the details, allowing the imagery to bear emotional weight. Ramirez's shadow retreats as he steps backward, a subtle retreat that would register with a viewer's subconscious as withdrawal. Hawkins's form remains steady, forward-leaning, a blade slicing through the ambient calm. And in that space between them, the camera holds two figures, poised for collision. The air itself trembling with unspoken fears and uncharted possibilities. Then, without warning, a distant whistle pierces the dawn. Sharp, urgent. It isn't the command for formation. It feels more like an alarm. Ramirez's head snaps up. Hawkins halts, eyes narrowing. They both register the same alarm, the same foreboding. The mist flickers as though disturbed by an unseen force. It's the moment before stones tumble in an avalanche. Quiet, pregnant with potential energy. The narrative stakes bloom. Viewers are drawn to ask, what triggered the whistle? Is it a drill gone awry? Or an intrusion from beyond the yard's walls? Does Ramirez already know the answer, and did it drive him to prepare his weapon? Has Hawkins received a clandestine message that altered his course? The questions swirl in that silent tableau, each more urgent than the last. As the camera slowly cranes upward, revealing the entire yard. A vast stage of looming structures and silent machinery. The light grows brighter, bathing everything in stark clarity. The dawn's promise of illumination becomes almost cruel. Soon, every muscle, every hesitancy, every hidden motive will stand exposed. And then, at the very instant the pale sun cresting the horizon floods the scene with brilliance, the film cuts. No shot fires, no gun is drawn. Yet the tension detonates within each viewer's mind. The screen goes black, the silence resumes. But it is no longer empty. It hums with expectation, charged with the certainty that the storm has begun in hearts and minds, even if the first bullet has yet to fly. This opening sequence, the quiet before the storm, does more than set the scene. It primes the audience's senses, aligns them with both men's internal landscapes, and locks their focus on the unscripted variables that could tip every scale. Every detail, from mist to shadow to that single, urgent whistle, converges to create a living, breathing moment of suspense. It's a masterclass in restraint. By holding back the violence, the narrative forges an even sharper anticipation of the inevitable clash. When the storm finally breaks, it will do so not as a surprise, but as the only possible release of the mounting pressure, a release that every heartbeat in the audience has already foreseen. Fractured rapport unfolds in the austere corridor beside the weapons storage building, where every footstep reverberates off cold concrete walls. Rows of steel cabinets stand like silent sentinels, their riveted doors locked tight. Faint fluorescent lights overhead hum with a steady drone, throwing clinical pools of light onto the polished floor. This is a place of precision and order, until two figures appear, each threatening to upend the fragile balance. Lieutenant Samuel Hawkins emerges first, his posture erect as he strides toward the arsenal entry. His crisp uniform jacket is buttoned to the collar, brass insignias gleaming under the glare of the tubes. The lieutenant's boots click in measured rhythm, a metronome of authority. Behind him, Officer Miguel Ramirez follows more hesitantly, the soft scuff of his loafers betraying nerves that no drill could erase. In his hand, Ramirez carries a worn notebook, dog-eared, scribbled with observations. His lifeline in a situation spiraling beyond protocol. They meet at the narrow junction between two storage bays. For a heartbeat, neither speaks. Hawkins raises an eyebrow, acknowledging Ramirez's presence with a tilt of his head. The camera holds a medium shot. Both men framed within the doorway, personal space contracted to inches. Silence stretches until Ramirez exhales sharply, voice quavering despite his effort to steady it. "Sir," Ramirez begins, "I need to discuss the briefing you gave earlier." His tone is imploring, each syllable edged with urgency. The notebook is pressed against his hip like armor. Hawkins studies him for a moment, lips tightening. "We covered everything," he replies, voice cool. "You know your directives. Questions should go through your sergeant." Ramirez shifts forward, eyes wide. "With all due respect, Lieutenant, This isn't routine. The orders contradict established safety protocols. We can't proceed without clarification. His words tumble out, crackling with suppressed fear. Hawkins straightens, gaze sharpening. Officer, informal objections delay operations. You're under orders to follow chain of command unless you want me to file insubordination. His tone is clinical, as though diagnosing an illness. There is no room for debate, no hint of concession. The air thickens. Ramirez's jaw ticks, a vein pulses at his temple. He glances toward the locked cabinets. Each firearm, each round of ammunition awaiting release under strict supervision. In his mind, he sees the worst-case scenarios: a misfired shot, a collateral injury, a scandal that drags both their careers through the mud. But he swallows down the panic and squares his shoulders. Sir, with respect, Ramirez presses on, voice now steadier. I witnessed several recruits handling live rounds without the proper checks. If we follow your directive as is, someone could get hurt. He steps even closer, the notebook now open in his left hand, pages fluttering like trapped birds. Hawkins recoils slightly, arms crossing over his chest. The camera cuts to a close-up of his face. Eyes cool, lips curling into a thin smile. Recruits learn discipline through action, he says. You're overthinking this. Ramirez's heart pounds. He forces himself to meet Hawkins's gaze. Discipline isn't a substitute for safety. I've already reported the discrepancies to the quartermaster. If you won't adjust the protocol, I will. For a moment, the world seems to tilt. A single fluorescent tube flickers above, and both men glance upward as if expecting the ceiling to cave in. Then Hawkins inhales slowly, as though reclaiming a composure that had flickered under Ramirez's insistence. Very well, Hawkins says, voice low now, stripped of earlier arrogance. You can file your report, but until it's approved, we proceed as planned. He taps a finger against the cabinet's biometric lock, its scanner glowing in response. And officer, he adds, stepping around Ramirez, remember your place. Ramirez flinches at the words, the sting more vibrant than any physical blow. He watches Hawkins enter the access code, the lock clicking open with an authoritative thunk. The lieutenant's back is to him now, broad shoulders moving with purpose as he retrieves a standard-issue rifle from the rack. The weapon is cold to the touch, its metal seems seamless, an embodiment of the order Hawkins clings to. Alone in the doorway, Ramirez stands framed by the now open cabinet. Dust motes drift through the harsh light, and for a moment he considers closing his eyes to blot out the scene. Instead, he draws in a breath, tasting the acrid pull of fear and determination. A bead of sweat traces a line down his temple, a silent testament to the pressure mounting inside him. The camera pulls back to a medium shot as Ramirez steps fully into the storage bay, the warming glow of the open locker casting half his face in shadow. He closes the notebook with a decisive snap. Pages settle, ink smudged from rapid annotation. His other hand drifts to the pistol holstered at his belt, a reminder that he, too, carries authority and responsibility. Behind him, Hawkins secures the rifle on his shoulder and turns. The lieutenant's posture is triumphant, as though the tools of his trade affirm his supremacy. He gives Ramirez one last nod, an acknowledgement and brush-off fused into a single gesture. Then he pivots and strides away, footsteps echoing down the corridor, each step widening the chasm between them. Ramirez watches him go, chest tightening. The compartment door stands ajar, a silent threshold between duty and conscience. He stands motionless until Hawkins's silhouette vanishes around a corner. Only then does he exhale, and the sound is a quiet rupture in the stillness. His eyes linger on the closed locker, and he realizes that every protocol he cherishes may now conflict with every order he must obey. As the scene fades, viewers sense Ramirez's internal struggle crystallize, caught between loyalty to a flawed chain of command and the imperative to protect lives. The storage bay's harsh light becomes an interrogation lamp, compelling him to confront his deepest convictions. And when the camera finally cuts away, it leaves behind the echo of two men's convictions colliding, and the unspoken promise that this fracture will determine the fate of every life in that yard. The midday sun blazed down on the empty firing line, turning the concrete into a mirror that reflected every twitch and twitch in Officer Miguel Ramirez's restless movements. He walked with a purpose he couldn't articulate, each step measured yet hurried. Toe to heel, heel to toe. His lips moved in muted incantations, fragments of strategy, pleas for reason, curses at the unfairness of it all. Every so often, he paused, glanced at the target stands, and ran a hand through damp hair, as if scrubbing away doubt. Across the yard, trainees went through their drills without missing a beat. Their rifles rose and fell in unison, a silent metronome against Ramirez's ragged cadence. The camera would catch them in soft focus, emphasizing how ordinary their routine was at. Even as tension spiraled off-screen, shadows flickered across the cracked concrete, chasing one another in the bright light. It was as if the yard itself breathed, exhaling anticipation. Then, without fanfare, Lieutenant Samuel Hawkins returned. He was flanked by Sergeants Diaz and O'Connor, two veterans of countless operations, each exuding the poise of men who had long since mastered control. Hawkins wore his uniform like armor, jacket buttoned, posture taut, gaze fixed on Ramirez. Diaz's arms were folded, O'Connor's jaw set. The three advanced together, a triangular phalanx of institutional power. Ramirez stopped pacing and squared his shoulders. His chest rose in a slow, deliberate breath. He didn't flinch as Hawkins approached, even though authority itself seemed to stride toward him. The sergeants took positions on either side of their lieutenant, forming a silent courtroom. The distance between Ramirez and Hawkins was more than a few feet. It was a chasm of conflicting beliefs. Hawkins tilted his head. "Officer Ramirez," he began, voice smooth but cool enough to chill. "Your behavior is disturbing. Care to explain what you're doing out here alone?" The question wasn't really an invitation. It was a summons to account for insubordination. Ramirez drew in a steadying breath and met Hawkins's eyes. "I'm ensuring every protocol is followed," he said, voice firm despite the tremor he felt. He gestured toward the inactive targets. "I watched recruits skip safety checks this morning. I warned them, but they ignored me. I thought you should know before we start the next drill." A faint curve of amusement touched Hawkins's lips. "You warned them? That's admirable zeal, but it's misplaced. The quartermaster certified those weapons. If you have concerns, submit a report during duty hours." His tone implied Ramirez's actions were childish, almost comical. Sergeant Diaz uncrossed his arms, stepping forward. "Lieutenant's right," he said. "We've gone over the logs. Everything's clear. What we don't need is someone jumping at shadows and slowing the mission." His gaze shifted to Ramirez's hands, one of which hovered over the pistol at his hip. The unspoken question flickered in the air. "Will he draw?" O'Connor's voice chiseled the tension further. "You're on thin ice, Ramirez." He took a half-step closer, boots scuffing the ground in crisp unison. "You think you're protecting lives, but you're undermining command. Turn it down, or you'll find yourself off the yard entirely." The word "off" echoed like a verdict. Ramirez swallowed hard, the taste of metal flooding his mouth. He flexed his fingers, feeling every contour of his holster beneath his palm. If he spoke now, his voice might crack. If he moved, the barrel might appear. The wide-angle lens would linger here, capturing the triangle of faces. Ramirez's resolve, Hawkins's disdain, the sergeant's unreadable watchfulness. He exhaled, steadying his gaze. "Sir," he said quietly, "I won't compromise safety. If that means I'm insubordinate, so be it." There was no bravado in his words, only a quiet determination that filled the space between them. Hawkins's eyes narrowed, a storm gathering behind the calm veneer. He turned his head, as if to dismiss the entire exchange. "Very well. We proceed." His voice, even as it spoke conformity, sounded hollow, like metal ringing in an empty hall. Diaz and O'Connor exchanged a glance, then fell back in step behind him. Ramirez watched them walk away, each stride an admonition. His heart pounded so fiercely he could almost hear it above the hum of the sunlit yard. The sergeants melted back into the background, and Hawkins's figure receded until it was one authoritative shape among many. Then he was gone, swallowed by the routine he had tried it and failed to derail. Left alone once more, Ramirez's shoulders slumped, and the pistol at his side felt impossibly heavy. The midday heat pressed down, urging every muscle toward exhaustion. Yet in that blistering quiet, something shifted inside him. The coiled tension of discipline and conscience unwound into a cold, clear resolve. He would file that report. He would challenge orders. He would stand his ground, even if it fractured his career. The camera would hold this final shot. Ramirez, solitary beneath the unforgiving sun, shadows at his feet stretching toward the horizon. His breath steadies. His jaw sets. The narrative doesn't need to tell the audience what comes next. They already know the stakes have risen. In this crucible of midday heat and rigid protocol, a man has chosen a path that demands both courage and sacrifice, and the world will never look the same again. The air seemed to crackle in the split second before Ramirez's hand left his holster. Tom stretched thin, every heartbeat a drumbeat in his ears, every breath a fragile thread. His knuckles whitened on the pistol grip as he drew, the cold steel sliding into his palm with a smooth, inevitable click. The world blurred at the edges, the rigid posture of Hawkins before him, the empty expanse of the training yard, even the sun high overhead seemed to stall in its arc. Ramirez's finger hovered, trembling just above the trigger. He saw Hawkins's eyes widen, captured in breathtaking slow motion, pupils dilating, a startled intake of air that puffed his cheeks, eyelashes beating like trapped moths. The lieutenant's authoritative mask slipped for an instant, replaced by raw, human panic. Ramirez swallowed the lump in his throat, the taste of copper rising in his mouth. Then the shot rang out sharp, rattling, an explosion of sound that shattered the hushed tension. The bullet tore through the hush of the yard, its echo drifting off the concrete walls like a wounded animal's cry. In that heartbeat-elongated moment, the muzzle blast blossomed in a white-orange bloom, illuminating Ramirez's face, horror etched in every line, disgust mingled with resolve. Hawkins's form jerked backward as if stricken by lightning. His chest heaved, legs splayed awkwardly before bending at the knees. He staggered, arms flailing for balance, before crashing onto the ground in a cloud of dust. The rifle he'd carried slid from his grasp, thudding against the pavement with a dull finality. A high-pitched gasp, half scream, half plea, escaped Hawkins's lips. His hand rose to his side as if seeking reassurance, then fell limply, fingertips brushing a spreading stain that darkened the fabric of his uniform. The camera of the mind's eye lingered on that moment. The shock in his eyes, the soft exhalation that sounded like a child's whimper. Time paused, held in the fragile space between action and consequence. Ramirez stood frozen, the smoking barrel still warm in his grip. Sweat beaded along his hairline, snaking down his temples. He blinked once, twice, as though hoping the image would dissolve, that the lieutenant would rise again, unhurt. But Hawkins lay still, shadows lengthening across his face. Silence returned with a thud, oppressive as a lead blanket. In that hush, Ramirez's thoughts spiraled. He'd rehearsed this moment countless times. Flashbacks of recruits mishandling live rounds, warnings unheeded, orders he couldn't ignore. Yet none of those rehearsals captured the raw, visceral surge of regret that flooded him now. The pistol in his hand felt foreign, an instrument of irreversible choice. Slow motion continued in his mind, replaying the recoil of the shot, the recoil of his soul. He saw the dust swirl beneath Hawkins's fallen form, the rifle's metallic sheen dulled by neglect, the echo's afterimage shimmering on the empty targets. Every element of the yard, the cracked concrete, the faded lines, the distant barracks walls, was suddenly charged with guilt. A low moan broke the stillness, jagged and unexpected. Ramirez's gaze snapped to Hawkins's face, where pain and betrayal tangled in his stare. The lieutenant's hand shifted, fingertips brushing the dark stain. Light glinted on wet metal fragments, the tipped edge of the bullet now lodged somewhere deep beneath uniform and flesh. Ramirez stepped forward, holstering his weapon with hands that trembled like leaves in a storm. Hawkins's voice emerged, raw, "Miguel?" His tone wavered, disbelief mingling with accusation. "Why?" The single word carried the weight of their shared history, the mentorship Ramirez once revered, the trust that had bound them to the same cause. Ramirez knelt beside him, the yard's dust coating his knees. He reached out, fingers hovering above Hawkins's shoulder as if seeking forgiveness in contact. "I had no choice," he whispered. His voice cracked, revealing the chasm between duty and morality. "You left me no choice." Blood welled around Hawkins's wound, dark as oil. Ramirez's heart pounded in his ears, each beat an admonition. Escape, apologize, die. He tore a strip from his uniform shirt and pressed it against the wound, stifling the flow as best he could. The lieutenant's breathing was ragged now, each inhale a shuddered victory over oblivion. Above them, the sun continued its indifferent course, oblivious to the fracture in the yard below. Shadows quivered at the edge of the frame, as though recoiling from the violence. In the distance, the muffled hum of training drills persisted, recruits unaware that their world had shifted on a single, devastating note. Ramirez pressed harder, voice urgent. "Hold on, sir. Medics are on the way." He reached for his radio, fumbling for the channel to summon help. The device felt slippery in his grip, as though coated in shame. Hawkins's gaze met his, fierce even in pain. "You shouldn't have." His words were labored, but the accusation cut deeper than any bullet. Ramirez's throat constricted, remorse pooling in his chest. Before he could answer, distant shouts rippled across the yard. Footsteps thundered, growing louder with each passing second. Ramirez stood, tensing as shadows advanced, sergeants, medics, fellow officers flooding into the scene. Their faces were masks of shock and suspicion, eyes darting between Ramirez and the prone lieutenant. A medic knelt, probing Hawkins's wound with practiced efficiency. A sergeant grabbed Ramirez's arm. "What the hell happened?" The question was a lance aimed at Ramirez's heart. He opened his mouth to explain, to share the months of mounting fear, the ignored warnings, the moral imperative that had driven him to this point. But words failed him. Instead, he sank to the ground, head bowed, the weight of his decision pressing him into the dirt. The medic looked up. "We need space." Officers backed away, forming a hesitant circle. Ramirez's uniform was stained. The badge at his chest felt like a lie. The pistol lay discarded a few feet away, a silent testament to the moment his world fractured. Paramedics loaded Hawkins onto a stretcher, rushing him toward the waiting ambulance. Ramirez followed, each step a procession of guilt. He pressed the ragged end of his shirt into his mouth, stifling a sob. The sirens wailed, a mournful chorus for the day's grim revelation. As the ambulance doors closed, Hawkins glanced back, eyes glazed but unbroken. A single nod, a flicker of understanding, perhaps forgiveness, passed between them before darkness swallowed his form. Ramirez reached out, pressing his palm to the tinted window. The glass separated them, truth and consequence now sealed behind layers of steel and broken trust. The shot's echo lingered, drifting on the wind long after the ambulance vanished. Ramirez remained in the center of the yard, shards of sunlight dancing around him, shadows creeping inward. The pistol lay at his feet, rustling the dust, a mute reminder of the moment that redefined everything. And in that vast, empty expanse, Ramirez understood that no training, no protocol, no loyalty could erase the weight of a single pull of a trigger, nor the silence that follows the echo of a man's life changing forever. The crackle of the radio snapped the silence into jagged fragments. "Unit 1 to command, we have a Code 3 officer down. Requesting immediate medical evac." The voice was urgent, fractured by static. Ramirez remained rooted to the spot, sweat beading at his hairline as if the midday heat had condensed on his skin. Around him, the world exploded into motion, boots pounding the concrete, the metallic clang of gear, shouts ricocheting off distant walls. Sergeant Diaz barreled into the frame first, weapon still drawn, eyes scanning for threats even as adrenaline throbbed in his temples. Behind him, other officers fanned out, weapons pointed downward but ready, breaths measured against the humming engines of idling vehicles. Each step carried a dual imperative: secure the scene, save a life. A pair of medics knelt beside Hawkins, their gloves snapping into place like ritual. One pressed a sterile gauze pad against the lieutenant's uniform, fingers probing for the wound beneath. The other rigged in 4-line, its translucent tubing looping toward a blood bag glinting in the afternoon sun. Their movements were precise, a choreography learned through countless drills, yet shadowed by the grim reality before them. Ramirez watched with the detachment of a man hollowed by shock. His arms hung limply at his sides, uniform stained and creased. Regret pooled in his chest, each breath a struggle against the weight of what he'd done. He remembered the moment everything slowed. The muzzle flash, Hawkins's gasp, the thud of a body hitting the ground. Now time sped past him, urgent and unrelenting. Two officers approached, handcuffs clicking open like locks falling from a chain. "Miguel Ramirez, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon," one intoned, voice steady as a judge's gavel. Ramirez's gaze lifted, meeting theirs for the first time in that tidal wave of chaos. He didn't resist, he barely registered the metal sliding around his wrists. The cold bite of steel seemed almost merciful, drawing him into a new reality. An officer produced a small, laminated card and recited Ramirez's rights. Each phrase sounded distant, mirrored in the pounding of Ramirez's heart. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." The syllables were familiar from training videos, yet now they dripped with finality. When the reading ended, Ramirez's head lolled forward as though bowed beneath the verdict of his own conscience. Amid the flurry, a helicopter droned into view, its spotlight slicing across the scene. Paramedics loaded Hawkins onto a stretcher, strapping him in with practiced urgency. The lieutenant's uniform was soaked with blood, the fabric taut over his ribs. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, locking onto Ramirez. No words passed between them. Only a quiet acknowledgement of the betrayal and regret that now bound them. The helicopter's blades kicked up a swirl of dust and debris, painting the officer's boots with grime. As Hawkins was lifted skyward, the yard's atmosphere shifted. Orders barked to clear a landing zone, flares popped in a halo of red and blue light, and engines roared as ambulances pulled in. The emptiness that had preceded the shot was replaced by an orchestrated bedlam. In the final, wide-angle shot, the training ground resembled a war zone transformed by emergency response. Flashing lights danced across metal barricades and spare ammunition crates. Officers and medics moved in a rhythmic blur, each driven by the singular goal of salvage of lives, careers, and reputations. And at the center of it all, Ramirez stood alone, handcuffed and silent, the embodiment of a single moment's power to shatter everything in its path. The interrogation room's single overhead lamp cast harsh shadows across the scarred metal table. Ramirez sat rigidly in the folding chair, wrists still chafed from the handcuffs, eyes fixed on the investigator's unreadable face. Across from him, Agent Claire Donovan folded her arms, lips pressed into a thin line, every movement deliberate. A ticking clock on the wall marked time in cold, mechanical beats as the air grew taut with unspoken questions. Donovan tapped a pen against her notepad. "Officer Ramirez," she began, voice level but edged with curiosity, "you pulled the trigger on Lieutenant Hawkins. You know that puts you squarely in violation of federal statutes." Her gaze pinioned him in place, challenging him to hide nothing. Ramirez inhaled slowly. His throat felt raw. "Yes," he admitted, voice low. "I fired." He paused, searching for the right words. "But there's more you need to know." A curt nod from Donovan invited explanation. Ramirez leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Hawkins wasn't who we thought. He had orders of his own, and they almost killed recruits under my watch." At that, Donovan's expression flickered into skepticism. She uncapped her pen. "Elaborate." Ramirez closed his eyes briefly, summoning the sequence of events. 2 weeks ago, I intercepted a coded message lodged in his personal effects. It wasn't standard protocol. It read, "Operation Iron Wall is greenlit. Accelerate live fire exercises immediately. No questions." He tapped the tabletop. I pressed him for clarity. He snapped at me, threatened disciplinary action if I raised it again. Donovan's eyebrows climbed. "You're certain this message came from him?" Flash to a tight shot. Ramirez rifling through Hawkins's morning bag, fingers brushing the crumpled note. Its ink smudged by sweat. Back to the room. Donovan's pen hovered over her notes. Continue. During the drills last Thursday, recruits reported phantom orders to fire at unmarked targets, Ramirez said, jaw set. 3 almost pulled the trigger on each other. I stopped them. When I went to Hawkins, he laughed it off, said I was overstepping. His voice cracked. I refused. He hauled me before the quartermaster and gave me a demerit. Donovan's lips parted. She glanced down, jotting a phrase, reprimand for insubordination. Then she looked back up, expression unreadable again. And you believe this Operation Iron Wall would have put recruits in jeopardy? Ramirez nodded. He described the flashback in vivid strokes, the moment Hawkins barked at new recruits, forcing them to fire without briefing, the frightened eyes of a 19-year-old trainee, the crack of a rifle echoing too close to another man's head. Cut to Donovan's jaw tightening as she absorbed the implication. Why didn't you take this up the chain of command? Donovan asked, voice cooler now. Ramirez's shoulders slumped. Because Hawkins controlled that chain. He'd ingratiated himself with the command staff. No one would listen. By the time I went outside channels, it was too late. Orders were in motion. In the dim light, Donovan's face softened just slightly. She leaned back, fingers steepled. "Show me the message." Ramirez reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded scrap of paper. Donovan studied the faded block-letter text. She turned it slowly, as if tracing hidden lines. Then she exhaled, the sound soft but loaded with realization. A flashback overlaid the room. Donovan at headquarters, discovering similar coded communications in classified files. She had buried them in a drawer after warnings from her superiors. Cut back, she set the note on the table. "Operation Iron Wall," she murmured. "It's not in any official records." Ramirez swallowed. "Because it was off the books." Donovan's eyes flicked to the door. She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring privacy. Then she returned her gaze to Ramirez. "You did what you thought was right," she said slowly. "You tried every option you had." Her tone lacked judgment. Instead, it bristled with urgency. "We need to expose this. Lives are on the line." As she spoke, another flashback took shape. Hawkins in the briefing room, handing Ramirez the formal reprimand, then meeting with a shadowy figure, someone from higher command. Passing him a sealed folder marked "Top Secret." Their hushed exchange, the glint of a gold insignia in the dim office light. Ramirez's face in disbelief. Back in the interrogation room, Donovan's voice pierced the memory. "I'm going to reopen your case," she declared, "and launch an internal probe into Hawkins's command directives. But first, I need your full statement, every detail." Ramirez nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. He uncrossed his legs, opened his palms. "I'll tell you everything." Donovan stood abruptly, chair scraping. She walked around the table and, without breaking eye contact, handed him a new pad. "Start from the beginning. Dates, names, conversations." Her tone was firm, but behind it lay an unspoken alliance. Ramirez lifted the pen, poised to write, as he dove into the chronology. How he first noticed discrepancies in training logs, how Hawkins's dismissive grin had masked deeper complicity, how each decision had been weighted by fear. For himself and for the unsuspecting recruits. His words tumbled out, crisp and urgent, as Donovan recorded them meticulously. Outside the interrogation room, a corridor of offices stretched into muted shadows. Through the narrow window, colleagues darted past, unaware that a reckoning was unfolding inside. Donovan glanced at her watch, then at Ramirez's earnest face. She scribbled one final note and closed her book with determination. "I'll need your cooperation to subpoena Hawkins's records," she said, voice low. "And I'm putting you on paid administrative leave until we clear your name." Ramirez looked up, astonished. "Paid leave?" Donovan allowed herself a small, wry smile. "I owe you that much." She retrieved the coded message from the table, folded it, and pocketed it. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we hit the command center." Ramirez exhaled, tension ebbing from his shoulders for the first time in days. The investigators' earlier skepticism had given way to conviction. Together, they would peel back the layers of deception that Hawkins had constructed. As the camera would pull back in the final shot, Donovan stepped out into the corridor, walking briskly toward the elevators, leaving Ramirez to gather his scattered thoughts. The door swung closed behind her, plunging him back into half-light, but now charged with purpose rather than dread. His confession would ignite the probe, revealing a cover-up that stretched far beyond the training yard. And for viewers, this twist would reshape every moment they'd witnessed, proving that sometimes the greatest threat lies not in rogue bullets, but in the quiet schemes of those sworn to protect. The dusk sky bled into shades of purple and gold as the camera drifted once more across the training yard. Empty rows of targets stood like silent sentinels, their battered surfaces etched with the memory of each shot fired. Helmets lay abandoned on guardrails. Stray spent casings glinted where they fell. The wind whispered through the vacant lanes, carrying fragments of a day's worth of conflict and consequence. A low, steady voiceover began. Ramirez's own words, measured yet laden with weight. "I joined this service believing in clear lines. Right and wrong, orders and obedience," he said. The shot dissolved into him crouched by his kit bag, pulling out his pistol one final time. Fingers traced the cool metal, lifting the weapon with reverence. There was no flashback here, just the deliberate act of unholstering, inspecting, and placing it gently into a lockbox. Each click of the latch resonated like a verdict rendered. Cut to a montage of TV screens in a dimly lit living room. Headlines scrolled beneath newscasters' solemn tones. Lieutenant Hawkins arrested on conspiracy charges, one banner read. Another bore Ramirez's name, officer faces trial for assault, truth, or treason? The words blurred momentarily as the camera lingered on news clippings pinned to a bulletin board, photos of Hawkins in uniform, stern-faced, Ramirez in handcuffs, eyes downcast. Viewers felt the momentum of public opinion, swinging between condemnation and sympathy. Ramirez's voice returned, softer now. When I pulled the trigger, I believed I was stopping a greater harm. The shot cut to him stepping away from the lockbox, shoulders tight with remembrance. He ran a hand through his hair as shadows lengthened across concrete. The yard looked different at dusk, its order preserved, even as the scars of conflict remained unseen. News footage shifted to a courtroom sketch, Ramirez at the defense table, counsel by his side. The judge's gavel hovered as testimonies unfolded. A recruit took the stand, voice trembling as she recounted clandestine orders to fire at unmarked targets. A whistleblower officer described the coded message that set everything in motion. The murmurs of the gallery rose and fell in sympathetic chords. Ramirez's face appeared midway through, jaw set, eyes distant. Even in illustrated form, his resolve was palpable. The voiceover threaded through these images. I fought for something I believed in, protection of the innocent, accountability for the powerful. But doing what's right sometimes means standing against your own. The scene cut back to the yard's perimeter fence, bathed in the last rays of sun. A lone training vehicle, its hatch open, stood idle as if awaiting orders that would never come. Ramirez re-emerged in close-up, seated on the edge of a concrete firing line. His uniform was crisp despite the day's turmoil. The lockbox rested beside him. He opened it one more time, tracing the outline of the pistol with a reverent hush. This weapon protected me and took away what I valued most in another man, he said. His eyes flicked upward, meeting the horizon's fading light as if seeking absolution. A final news clip appeared. Hawkins being led away in handcuffs, face set in resignation. Reports of multiple counts, conspiracy, endangering recruits, obstruction scrolled across the ticker. The camera pulled back, revealing Ramirez standing alone among the targets. His posture was firm, silhouette etched against the twilight sky. The empty field around him seemed to hold its breath. His voiceover concluded, "My actions will define me in the eyes of the law and the court of public opinion." Yet beyond verdicts, there lies a question each of us must answer. When orders conflict with ethics, will you obey, or will you act on conscience? He inhaled deeply, shoulders relaxing as though releasing a burden too long carried. In the final shot, Ramirez pocketed the lockbox key. He walked to the furthest target, each footstep echoing like a measured heartbeat. Stopping before the weathered board, he placed the key at its base, a quiet offering to duty and redemption alike. He turned his gaze back to the horizon, where the last glimmers of sun dissolved into night. The screen held on that lone figure for several beats, the only sound the soft sigh of wind. Then, as the darkness fully claimed the yard, the scene faded to black, leaving viewers suspended between the promise of justice and the cost of moral courage. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you are watching from and drop your thoughts in the comments. What did you feel when Ramirez took that stand against Hawkins? Which character's journey resonated with you the most? Your insights guide us to create more impactful narratives. Be sure to ring the bell icon to stay updated on every episode of Mr. Fab Tales. We can't wait to read your comments and discover how our stories connect communities around the world today. We appreciate you.